in 10 years' time, 30% of the organization would not be able to survive if they don't change. Change is part and parcel of any organization because the competition, because the innovation, the technology upliftment.
Welcome to Process Pioneers, the show that takes a deep dive into the minds of decision makers, key influencers, and process experts who are pioneering the world of everything process. Welcome to the next episode of Process Pioneers. My name is Daniel Rayner. I'm the host of Process Pioneers. And in today's episode, I have the absolute privilege of sitting down with Gaurav Angi. Now, Guarav, he is currently a director of process transformation. He has more than 21 years of experience in the process transformation space. And believe it or not, he's delivered these pieces of work in more than 13 different countries, which it's just hard to fathom that, doing process transformation in all of these different countries, speaking all the different languages, and across all different industries as well: financial services, telco, airlines, utilities, mining, the list goes on. Guarav has a lot of experience when it comes to process transformation. So you can tell I'm pretty excited about this conversation. Guarav, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Daniel, and thank you for providing this opportunity, and looking forward to have the discussion with you today.
So one question that our audience always loves to kick off with is, how did you get into the process space? Is it something that you were formally sort of trained and qualified in, or is it something that you kind of stumbled into the space? Obviously, for the last 21 years, you've been doing a ton of work to do with process, but how did it all begin?
Daniel, I think that goes long back. Actually, when I started my career back, I did my just to get to my education, I did my engineering in mechanical stream back in 2001 in India. I started in automobile industry, and I was working in research and development department over there to understand before any product is being released to the production, to ensure that meets all the required standard and procedures, so that when the mass production happens, we can actually maintain a certain quality associated with that, whether it's an engineering standards, whether it's a specification that is required. As part of this role, my core accountability was to look at the data and statistics behind it, and that's how I got introduced to a Six Sigma concept over there. I worked in 2 years, and by this time, service industry was definitely booming, and outsourcing piece, especially from a call center perspective, was playing a big role in the industry. So I got an opportunity after working 2 years in automobiles to move to a service industry, wherein I did my all accreditation in Six Sigma, whether it's green belt and then black belt and then lead black belt, and I did multiple projects associated with that. In fact, being from engineering background, being from statistics background, I actually did my advanced statistics trainings as well, to ensure that I get to the bottom of it, that how the data is being used to identify the root cause to improve the business performances. I think back in 2005, when organizations were looking at to reduce the cost across different geographies, they were looking for the back of the house processes, which is to look at that, how do we look at those processes and look at those outsourcing piece as well. And that's how I got introduced to BPM, or a lean as a concept. That I was the first trained in lean back in 2005, and then I read a book called The Toyota Way. I'm sure you would have heard about that book. That actually changed my thinking, and the good thing about that book and my training in lean was to understand that it's not a methodology, it's how organization operates. This is how, and then the reason why they are successful as well, it's about the thinking that they inculcate in the operations in the ground as well. And my first experience, we had to look at the back of the house processes in an investment bank, to look at that, how do I redesign, look at the as is process, and how do I dismantle a low complex work and redesign the to be process, and then manage those process risks and handoffs, so that it is effectively being able to lift and shift. And that's how I got introduced to BPM, and that's where the journey started. and so on. So then, I worked in around 13 different organizations, multiple clients, multiple, areas where I got an opportunity to work in the different client organization, to understand those value adds, to implement or design those BPMs, customize those BPMs, business process management frameworks for them, and train people right from somebody like inculcating a culture from a zero to look at, to inculcate that culture across the organizations.
Yeah, that's great. That's fantastic. Thanks for sharing that. So you've obviously worked, as you were saying, worked with many different organizations. I'd imagine that each of these organizations start off at a different maturity level, process maturity level. There are many different factors. There's the culture of the people. There is the buy-in from the senior leadership. There are all of these different variables. But I guess from all of these experiences, what would you say drives an organization to adopt process management? I mean, you mentioned before the topic of business performance. Is it always about, is it just about business performance? Is that the key driver for most organizations?
Not really, Daniel. I think the story actually always flow from top to bottom. When I say that, historically, most of the organization always thought that BPM is a tool. So BPM is not a tool. BPM is a methodology. BPM is a foundation for any organization, which not necessarily talk about only performance, not necessarily talk about the processes. It's about there are multiple pillars where operations or a processes sits to be able to effectively run. And the key driver that organizations that have seen is predominantly comes from the three focus areas. One is definitely reducing the cost. Second is definitely improving the CX. And third is risk and compliance. That plays a vital role. Every organization has, some legal or compliance aspects they need to be care about, which is governed by some government, local government in that particular country or that industry, right? So you will have to have a consistent quality services being provided to your customers by reducing or maintaining the cost, and at the same time adhere to all this compliance and compliance that is required from an organization or a process to be. I guess that's where organizations start thinking about they need a platform, they need a foundation. The second, historically, what we have seen is that a lot of organizations are very dependent on a certain individuals because the knowledge is retained over there. And what I feel that because people sometimes they do things that if they share the knowledge that they may lose their jobs as well, right? But in reality, it's not about taking away any particular job. It's all about how do you make processes such as streamlined so that the processes are robust enough that you can introduce any new people effectively to manage the same and have a consistent quality of delivery. I think that's a driver for an organization to look at what are the system, process, and methodologies they need to follow to make the operations very robust.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there is an element of staying competitive as well. I think if there is if there are new companies like startups entering into your space or your industry and really disrupting the space, then sometimes there is a need to look at the business processes to be like, well, do we keep doing what we've always done, or do we need to change things up a little bit? Do we need to stay competitive? And in some cases that may mean work is optimized, work is automated, but it doesn't mean we don't have a need for those people. It's just we want to bring those people to do tasks and activity that's more valuable for their time, as opposed to, say, the low, repetitive, mundane tasks that everyone has parts of their job that they're not particularly excited about to do. But obviously, there's a lot of value in process transformation. What are the challenges that may come? Because I'm sure you're familiar with many organizations that adopt a BPM approach. but it doesn't quite work out the way they initially thought it would. In some cases, where they buy all the technology, or they get in consultants to sort of support them. Maybe they've had a crack at it by themselves, but they haven't managed to get to where they want to be. So, what are some of those challenges that organisations may face when adopting a BPM approach?
I think, Daniel, that you touched very important point here, right? The first, more important, there is a say, right? So they say that in 10 years' time, 30% of the organization would not be able to survive if they don't change. Change is part and parcel of any organization, because the competition, because the innovation, the technology upliftment, and you beat, and hence as a result, it's important to lay down the foundation to understand what your as-is landscape is. And at the same time measure your current performance, whether it's a CX, whether it's a cost, whether it's where do they stand, and how the technology innovations are happening across the industry. And I guess that's a bigger challenge. And I guess majority of and I'll share my own examples, some experiences as well that what we face, that where it fails, right? People think that BPMS is an event. The transformation or a process is an event. It's never an event. It's a journey. You move from step A to step B. And it's not about just putting those frameworks, implementing those frameworks. It's about how do you maintain, how do you improve on it. That's the crux of it, right? So you don't want to just invest in 2 months and create those processes. And down the line, you think that you have all the infrastructure processes in place. And you have multiple changes coming in. You have a system changes, you have a people changes, you have a best practices coming up, you have a small silos project or a transformation project which implements some change, and you will see in a 6 months time you're exactly not following what you have documented. Hence as a result, so it's BPMS is not a destination. It's a foundation that you lay down, and you need to maintain it. The second big crux here is that it's like this thing when you drive a car, right? So you need all the 4 wheels to ride and support the vehicle in the same way. You can't have one wheel perfectly running the way it should be, and all 3 are not supporting that. Exactly same thing happened in BPMS as well. It has to drive down across organization. What we have found is that you will always have a different operations leaders in the middle management, or I would say department heads. Some department heads are very definitely, very good and understand those BPMS methodology and very, very keen to implement in their areas. They would implement and they would sustain as well. But in reality, you will never see impact to your customer experience until unless the entire value chain that works together. And that's what it says, that your people, your processes, your system needs to work together to be able to effectively and efficiently manage your processes. And across the value chain, the customer will only see the impact when across the value chain is following the same practices. And that's how it is important. The BPMS is not a departmental issue or an individual. It has to flow down from a top leadership to the departments, to every individual who needs to contribute in it and maintain and sustain it. Now, the second perception, which I feel, that BPMS is not about a process documentation. It's not about creating your Visio or any particular process flow and you just document and store in the shared folders or a hub or a Confluence page at all. The BPMS is actually as a foundation which has multiple pillars underneath, which is about, first of all, document what you do. The second more impact, do what is documented. Because if you don't do what is documented, the consistency of quality of services will never come. The second more important is that you need to have the right measures, because there is measurement is the first step that leads to control and eventually to improve. If you can't measure something, you can't understand. And you can't understand, you can't control it. And if you can't control it, you can't improve it. That's a mantra, right? So, and the most important, you need to understand what you are measuring and why you are measuring. There has to be purpose behind it. And that's a foundation for any organization. Hence, as a result, and the your when you design your processes, when you do exactly what you have documented, then you need to measure your performances. Before you measure your performances, the measurement system needs to be aligned right from top to bottom. And that's the example I would like to share from my experience. That we had one of the project which we did was we had right first time as a metric. This matrices that we were driving. The right first time in a back of the house scenarios or a back office, right from a cycle time, right from a beginning where customer place a request till the time the life cycle of a customer interaction where he's satisfied with the services that is being provided. It's end to end. And in reality, you define your right first time very well. You go get into leadership meeting. You say right first time is, let's say, 90%, 85%, 88%, and you look at opportunities and you say that, oh, let's go and start to improve it. But in reality, we had a call center who were actually servicing the customer, and their KPI was how much time they take to pick up the calls. Their KPIs, that is operational KPIs that is required. But until unless your operational KPIs or individual KPIs is somehow not linked to the business matrices or a balanced scorecard or stay, the matrices which management is look at is not aligned, you won't see a dent on it because the visions are not aligned to that. Hence, as a result, the next piece of BPM is defining what measures what measure should be there, and more important, the purpose of these measures and how does that lead to the objective organization has got it. Second view, where the next pillar is all about the governance. There is no point of having world-class dashboards. There is no point of having a world-class data if you don't use this data, if you don't make a meaning out of this data.
Right.
We have seen that you have a metric report which says 150 measurements are there. What if you don't actually work on it? So it's important to understand you may have a 150 measures, but what are the key critical KPIs that you think that you need to drive on and you're not being target, and what you're doing about it, and how you're trying, what are the action plan, how you're governing. And to do the governance, the governance is not about just pushing people. The governance is all about habit about having the right huddles in place, having a visual management board in place, understand what are the drivers, what are the key action plan that is going to drive over there. Now that's where actually all automation, your machine learning, all the different tools that you will see in the market will come into the play. There is no point of just putting that tool when you don't know what you are measuring or what you want to achieve on it. So having the right governance and having a continuous improvement and transformation to ensure that you meet those KPIs is crucial over there, right? So that's the second pillar that I would say. And the next pillar in BPMS is your CX and quality, which is risk, compliance, quality. And I would like to put everything into a one bucket. In reality, customer experience across the board is taking a spotlight now. People want to, and the customer experience is not about selling or gaining new customers. The customer experience is retaining your existing customers. And that's the crux, right? And you will see that when you say your CX is 90%, your customer experience NPS is, your NPS is 40%, 50%, and you try to look at your extreme outliers and you want to improve on, those are the customer actually you need to understand and link it back to your journey to say, how do you have consistent services being provided to the customer? And that consistency will only come when you actually work on the first pillar. It's you document what you do and you do what is documented. Otherwise, you will see the dent on your CX because the customer will face a different experience. And again, all these things, that the most important pillar lie underneath is a change management. You change your processes, you bring you all the transformation, but you don't go back to your first pillar of keep reviewing the documents, to keep updating it, to ensure that the right training is provided, the right processes are being deployed. you cannot improve the process by sitting and doing a workshop in a meeting room. You can design your processes. If those processes to be processes are not being rolled out and implemented, you're not going to get results over there. So the change management plays a vital role here in all the pillars that I've spoken about, Daniel. And I think that's where I think summary, if I have to, it's not a destination, it's a journey.
Yeah.
You always, BPMS is a continuity. You need to work on that, and these lay down the foundation.
Yeah, that's great. That's really good. And obviously, you know, there's a lot there that you said. So I'm sort of scribbling down notes because I'm learning a lot myself. And for those that are listening, please, if you haven't already, get out your notepads and pens because we're in for a masterclass workshop here with Guarav. But I wanted to ask you, Guarav, like, if there is an organization, so if an organization takes note of everything that you've just told us, all of the challenges and everything that they should be doing to make sure that their BPM implementation is a success. And as you're saying, it's a journey. There isn't a destination where you get to and you're like, great, we've done BPM. We don't need to do it anymore. It is very much a journey that's ongoing. Do you have examples of stories or stories or case studies even of organizations that you've worked with yourself and they've adopted BPM or tweaked a process or improved something relating to the process improvement space or process management space, and they have realized significant value to the organization? Do you have a couple of examples or case studies you can share with us? Because I think that's the audience loves to see it when they can look at examples that are brought to life, because obviously a lot of the things are theoretical. This is what we should be doing. Do you have some examples where this is what organizations are actually doing and this is the results they're seeing from it?
Definitely, Daniel. I think if I have to pick one example to just correlate exactly how the BPM help us to basically reduce the cost and bringing the efficiency in the processes. So I got an opportunity to look at a process which was partially automated. So we were working on a life cycle of a customer getting onboarded till of applying for a service till the time he's ready to use the services. The entire life cycle was automated. When I say automated, you have a multiple system in the organization, and as part of multiple systems, there's a data flow that happens. There is information that moves from one system to another system, and you will always see is that 70-80% of that it's pretty automated. We call it blue sky, a zero touch, and you will have 25 to 30% as a fallouts that comes out of it, where somebody needs to manually put it back. It's like a train. The train automatically moving. The moment it's getting derailed, we had a couple of people who would just take the train and put it back on the track so that it's automated. We used to call it as a fallout management or exception management process, right? We to reduce the cost. What the organization did was we implemented a lot of robots, RPAs over there, and there is a say, right? The moment you automate a process which is inefficient, the magnitude of inefficiency will further go up because you're trying to look at, and that's exactly what happened. What happened was that we created the robots. Robot will exactly mimic the human being and actually take those exceptions and put it back over there. And not necessarily resolving. It's about derail and putting it back. And those exceptions are coming back again. Again, Robo will put it back over there without exactly. And what we found was over a period of time, the total number of exceptions are actually shooting up. And we had around, it moved to 20% of exceptions were there. And when we looked at those performances, we looked at those numbers, we looked at those processes, that's how we got to know. Because we were only worried about how many customers are getting blue sky, how many customers are exactly having at least one fallout. When we looked at those KPIs and we actually understood why my cost is going up. And that's how the mantra for measurement is, right? When you look at your numbers are static, because the robots are not actually impacting the processes. The process systems are exactly same, but what it started creating was more exceptions, more work for the back of the house team. But in reality, the KPI that we were tracking is the number of transactions which have at least one fallout or one exception. That was the KPI we were tracking. And the organization was tracking at that point in time. When we looked at that, why the cost is shooting up, that's how we got into the picture that we need to redesign the processes. It's instead of just automating what is there, we need to look at why it is coming. We need to go back. Instead of just putting all the energies into automate those inefficient processes, we need to identify the root cause of why those exceptions are coming and solve it upstream. There is no point of managing the problem and downstream when the problem has already happened and the customer is already getting impacted, and it's already impacted you right first time. And the first step we did was that we looked at back over there, looked at as-is processes, looked at the type of exception, understood the performances, looked at all the transformation initiatives, and look at the data behind it. And when we identified those root causes, we said we're not going to automate anymore until unless we totally sit together and re-engineer the process. And Daniel, I always see that when we were trying to re-engineer the process and redesigning the process, what we found was that the processes that we documented were around 2 years old. We had attrition was hitting the roof at that point in time. We had multiple outsourced partners. We had different functions who are touching those. The people have changed. The processes have evolved over a time. The systems have changed. But some of the resources, some of the people, it's still following the old process, and it's not their fault. They are exactly doing what they've been asked to do.
Right.
It's our accountability was, and to identify that, the only way we could actually see there is a problem there is something called Gamma walk. It's like go and see. We took up the process. We visited to the person who's actually managing the transaction to look at, can you do it in front of me, without saying it's not his fault. He's exactly doing what he has been trained to do it 1.5 years ago. And nobody has actually gone back and tell them that so many things have changed. This is the process tweaking that is required. And when we looked at him and we asked him that, look, we need your advice to change the processes. We knew where we can actually improve it. And he had 50 different ideas. And we said, it's just that nobody has spoken to him. So we took those practices. We came back to re-engineer the processes. Then we looked at that how the 2B process should work. And we wanted to stop it. And you won't believe, Daniel, we stopped all the robots, because that's at that point in time, we said we'll hold on it. And we actually let the manual exception comes in and try to manage it for a short duration with a small pilot. And we were able to reduce the exception by 30% to only 15% of the total transaction. Wow. And those 15% was also, in the 15% which we resolved was pretty low-hanging fruits. It's just a different vision. And I think, and that's how the BPM has helped us a lot. Until unless if we don't have a right processes documented, if we don't have a right measures to focus on, we could have always focused on right first time, let's automate more, let's reduce the cost, let's put more robots, let's reduce we want to reduce the manual intervention. But in reality, it won't work until unless you step back and look at holistical pictures and then look at how the 2B processes or as-is process should work and what are the bottlenecks in the processes.
Yeah, that's right. That's good. And I think it's so key to have a clear why, a clear purpose behind why are we doing this? Let's not just map processes. Let's not just document processes for the sake of documenting processes, because as you said earlier, that doesn't deliver any value to an organization if it's not actually outworked. Documenting something using boxes and circles and lines and stuff, that's actually not transforming your organization. But I guess it gives you that visibility to then make better decisions around making that change actually happen. So it's so key for people to understand why are we doing this, and having clear use cases like the example you just shared with us with all of those exceptions, like having a clear use case around, okay, what problem are we tackling? What are the current measures, and what's our target measure? What are we aiming for? How are we going to get from that 30% exceptions down to 15%? But having that really clear in your mind, I think, is so key. Because if you don't have a goal, if you don't have a target or somewhere you're aiming for, you're not going to get too far. You need to know where you're at currently and where you want to go. But you've mentioned that a couple of times, like getting buy-in, getting people on board, bringing people along for the journey. What does that look like for an organization because I have quite a few people listening to this podcast that they're currently sitting in organizations where they don't have full buy-in from the senior leadership team for business process management. Maybe they've been brought in, they're in one silo in the organization, or they're very isolated. It's not like there's a wider team that they're working within, but they're a process design lead that's been whacked into one area of the organization to do a bit of process mapping work. How do you get buy-in from senior leaders? What sort of language do people need to be using to try and bring senior leaders along for the journey?
I think, Daniel, that's very, very important question. I think that's I would say in any organization, if you're having a practice or a department who runs the BPM, so before they even embark their journey, it's how you explain, how you articulate the purpose behind it as well. So I'll give you a classic example, right? So I went to a senior leader, one of a client organization. I said, I would like to document your processes. He's saying, let's document the work instruction. When I document the work instruction, I get to know what a person is supposed to do, and I document with the screenshots, with step-by-step instruction. But then I looked at, before I reach to that, I need to follow a process hierarchy. I need to look at level 3 process flow. I need to look at level 4 process flow. And the idea was, why do you invest so much of energy if you want to document the processes? In reality, the purpose of putting those processes, which is either a departmental view or a functional view or a role view, in a swim lane, plays a vital role. Because it's not about just creating that process flow with the team view. It actually, all your next foundation of BPMS, which is your KPIs, which is your accountabilities, RACI, is dependent on that. Until unless you do not know what your upstream and downstream processes work, what are the interdependencies, how the handoff will happen. And if you don't, and that's how the RACI comes into play a vital role. And you cannot build a RACI if you don't have a process flow with the swim lanes, whether it's individual. And I think until unless you do not explain the purpose behind it, people are not going to buy it. They see waste of the activities. But you need to explain it as that. Even I'll give you, and another example was that they're saying that, okay, let's document the processes. When you say cycle time, cycle time is multiple departments, multiple people touch a transaction right from beginning to end. The cycle time is always, it's never a one person who's working perfectly fine in the front or in the middle in the entire value chain, until unless you do not have who are the people who are working, until unless you have a handoffs defined, until unless you have a reverse KPIs or internal KPIs between the different functions defined, you will never feel that where the bottleneck or delays are happening. And that's how the way you explain or articulate to the leadership team, it's not about documentation. It's not about, it's about the operating model. Your operating model will not, you cannot build the operating model if it is not stitched together right from start to beginning. And that's how you get a buy-in from the leadership team. It's not about just telling that this is what I want to do. It's the purpose behind it. And in reality, you don't do BPMs for yourself. You actually do the BPM for operations team to be able to successfully sustain efficient and effective processes and deliver the right output for customers. And you cannot have, if you don't have a lead on the foundation for it. So you cannot define my KPIs if I don't know what my roles are and what my accountabilities are. I cannot say that I will get this if I don't know the purpose of, let's say if you send me a document and I'm supposed to do X, Y, Z on it and deliver it output. If I don't understand the purpose of that output, if I don't know the users of what is going to do that, I will always do a mistakes because I really don't know the purpose behind it, right? And if I know by doing that act, the next person is going to, the to and fro that is happening between the function will automatically eliminate. And I think that's when for each and every element of a BPM, there is, you lay down the foundation and the purpose and the benefit needs to be very well explained in the leadership team, and the buy-in has to come over there. Hence, as a result, you cannot improve by implementing BPM in a small team. You have to start from top to down. Hence, as a result, a process hierarchy, you don't start documenting work instruction. You look at your level 1 to level 5 processes. That's how you come top to bottom, so that it has to flow from top to bottom. Until unless you don't do it, you cannot link it your operational KPIs to your business KPI. I hope I'm making, I've answered your question, Daniel.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It has to flow top to bottom. And now looking at, obviously, looking forward, I mean, at the moment, there's lots of technologies that are quite popular at the moment. We've mentioned RPA, robotic process automation. There's other technologies like process mining, hyper automation, all of these different types of technologies. But what does the future look like in the BPM space? Where should people be focusing on as we move over to, I guess, into the next 2, 3, 5 years? What trends are you noticing? And obviously every organization's at a different process maturity level, but when you look to the future of BPM, what does that look like?
I think, Daniel, if I have to, so it's like historically, if you look at most of the organization were working because to lay down the foundation, which is your BPM, and especially post-COVID, as we moved into a hybrid working model, organization want to reduce their dependency on a certain individual and look at the future and the future over there. And hence, as a result, organization they don't want to implement any, straight away jump into any robotics process automations, or organization wants to automate to an extent that is possible to reduce the manual touch. Hence, as a result, that you will see a shift that is happening in the industry. The shift that is happening now, it's from a reactive approach to proactive approach. So it's like you identify the problem before customer feel the pain. So there is no point of fixing the problem when customer feel the pain. Hence, as a result, that to do that, to implement that, a lot of analytics or predictive analytics coming into the picture to understand to how do we move from a reactive to proactive approach, so that we actually, while reducing the cost, you further uplift the cost CX. There is a bit of percent, and Daniel, that's where I feel the BPM will go in the future, right? So if a customer is calling because there is a trouble in the services, there is a problem in the services, there is a fault in the services that they are using, whether in a banking, telecom, utilities, anywhere, right? Customer is already dissatisfied with the services. That's how he's calling. So you're trying to satisfy a customer who's already dissatisfied. Hence, as a result, if we able to identify the problem before customer identify the problem, that's where your CX will further shoot up. You proactively call customer, you had a problem and I've already fixed it. I think that's where the nirvana is, I would say, from a CX perspective. And that's how the BPM is heading. So all the new technologies which are machine learning or predictive analytics are coming is supporting that actually. You predict the problem. You fix the problem before customer feel the problem.
Yeah. Okay. That's fantastic. That sounds like a place that a lot of organizations need to be. But it's an exciting future. It's exciting to know that that's what's coming up. And I think organizations need to take their processes seriously, because that's how they're going to continue to transform. It's going to be the reason why they're still around in the next 5, 10, 15 years. And I think it is so important. But Guarav, I just want to thank you so much for sitting down with me and having this conversation today. Obviously, we can only sort of squeeze so very few sort of topics in a 30, 40-minute conversation. But for anyone listening, if you've got any questions that Guarav maybe we haven't touched on today, or you'd love to connect with Guarav, then I guess, Guarav, where can they go? How do people connect with you to ask any of their follow-up questions?
they can approach in my LinkedIn profile as well, Daniel.
Yeah, perfect. Great. No, that's fantastic. Well, Guarav, thanks for sitting down. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks, Daniel. Thanks for giving this opportunity. It was a great talking to you. Thanks for the time as well.